In the chapter Knowledge of Self of the book Alchemy of Happiness, someone may here object, but if man has been created with animal and demonic qualities as well as angelic, how are we to know that the latter constitute his real essence, while the former are merely accidental and transitory? To this I answer that the essence of each creature is to be sought in that which is highest in it and peculiar to it. Thus the horse and the ass are both burden-bearing animals, but the superiority of the horse to the ass consists in its being adapted for use in battle. If it fails in this, it becomes degraded to the rank of burden-bearing animals. Similarly with man, the highest faculty in him is reason, which fits him for the contemplation of God. If this predominates in him, when he dies he leaves behind him all tendencies to passion and resentment, and becomes capable of association with angels. As regards his mere animal qualities, man is inferior to many animals, but reason makes him superior to them, as it is written in the Quran. To man we have subjected all things in the earth, but if his lower tendencies have triumphed, after death he will ever be looking towards the earth and longing for earthly delights. Now the rational soul in man abounds in marvels, both of knowledge and power. By means of it he masters arts and sciences, can pass in a flash from earth to heaven and back again, can map out the skies and measure the distances between the stars. By it also he can draw the fish from the sea and the birds from the air, and can subdue to his service animals like the elephant, the camel, and the horse. His 5 senses are like 5 doors opening on the external world. But more wonderful than this, his heart has a window which opens on the unseen world of spirits. In the state of sleep, when the avenues of the senses are closed, this window is opened, and man receives impressions from the unseen world, and sometimes foreshadowings of the future. His heart is then like a mirror which reflects what is pictured in the tablet of fate. But, even in sleep, thoughts of worldly things dull this mirror, so that the impressions it receives are not clear. After death, however, such thoughts vanish, and things are seen in their naked reality, and the saying in the Quran is fulfilled, "We have stripped the veil from off thee, and thy sight today is keen." This opening of a window in the heart towards the unseen also takes place in conditions approaching those of prophetic inspiration, when intuitions spring up in the mind unconveyed through any sense channel. The more a man purifies himself from fleshly lusts and concentrates his mind on God, the more conscious will he be of such intuitions. Those who are not conscious of them have no right to deny their reality, nor are such intuitions confined only to those of prophetic rank. Just as iron by sufficient polishing can be made into a mirror, so any mind by due discipline can be rendered receptive of such impressions. It was at this truth the prophet hinted when he said, "Every child is born with a predisposition towards Islam, then his parents make a Jew, or a Christian, or a star worshipper of him. Every human being has in the depths of his consciousness heard the question, 'Am I not your Lord?' and answered yes to it. But some hearts are like mirrors so befouled with rust and dirt that they give no clear reflections, while those of the prophets and saints, though they are men of like passions with us, are extremely sensitive to all divine impressions." Nor is it only by reason of knowledge acquired and intuitive that the soul of man holds the first rank among created things, but also by reason of power. Just as angels preside over the elements, so does the soul rule the members of the body. Those souls which attain a special degree of power not only rule their own body, but those of others also. If they wish a sick man to recover, he recovers, or a person in health to fall ill, he becomes ill, or if they will the presence of a person, he comes to them. According as the effects produced by these powerful souls are good or bad, they are termed miracles or sorceries. These souls differ from common folk in 3 ways. 1. What others only see in dreams they see in their waking moments. 2. While others' wills only affect their own bodies, these by willpower can move bodies extraneous to themselves. 3. The knowledge which others acquire by laborious learning comes to them by intuition. These 3, of course, are not the only marks which differentiate them from common people, but the only ones that come within our cognizance. Just as no one knows the real nature of God but God himself, so no one knows the real nature of a prophet but a prophet. Nor is this to be wondered at. As in everyday matters, we see that it is impossible to explain the charm of poetry to one whose ear is insusceptible of cadence and rhythm, or the glories of color to one who is stone blind. Besides mere incapacity, there are other hindrances to the attainment of spiritual truth. One of these is externally acquired knowledge. To use a figure, the heart may be represented as a well, and the five senses as five streams which are continually conveying water to it. In order to find out the real contents of the heart, these streams must be stopped for a time at any rate, and the refuse they have brought with them must be cleared out of the well. In other words, if we are to arrive at pure spiritual truth, we must put away, for the time, knowledge which has been acquired by external processes and which too often hardens into dogmatic prejudice. A mistake of an opposite kind is made by shallow people who, echoing some phrases which they have caught from Sufi teachers, go about decrying all knowledge. This is as if a person who was not an adept in alchemy were to go about saying, alchemy is better than gold, and were to refuse gold when it was offered to him. Alchemy is better than gold, but real alchemists are very rare, and so are real Sufis. He who has a mere smattering of Sufism is not superior to a learned man, any more than he who has tried a few experiments in alchemy has ground for despising a rich man. Anyone who will look into the matter will see that happiness is necessarily linked with the knowledge of God. Each faculty of ours delights in that for which it was created. Lust delights in accomplishing desire, anger in taking vengeance, the eye in seeing beautiful objects, and the ear in hearing harmonious sounds. The highest function of the soul of man is the perception of truth. In this accordingly, it finds its special delight. Even in trifling matters, such as learning chess, this holds good, and the higher the subject matter of the knowledge obtained, the greater the delight. A man would be pleased at being admitted into the confidence of a prime minister, but how much more if the king makes an intimate of him and discloses state secrets to him? An astronomer who by his knowledge can map the stars and describe their courses derives more pleasure from his knowledge than the chess player from his. Seeing then that nothing is higher than God, how great must be the delight which springs from the true knowledge of him. A person in whom the desire for this knowledge has disappeared is like one who has lost his appetite for healthy food, or who prefers feeding on clay to eating bread. All bodily appetites perish at death with the organs they use, but the soul dies not, and retains whatever knowledge of God it possesses, nay, increases it. An important part of our knowledge of God arises from the study and contemplation of our own bodies, which reveal to us the power, wisdom, and love of the Creator. His power in that from a mere drop he has built up the wonderful frame of man. His wisdom is revealed in its intricacies and the mutual adaptability of its parts, and his love is shown by his not only supplying such organs as are absolutely necessary for existence, as the liver, the heart, and the brain, but those which are not absolutely necessary, as the hand, the foot, the tongue, and the eye. To these he has added, as ornaments, the blackness of the hair, the redness of lips, and the curve of the eyebrows. Man has been truly termed a microcosm, or little world in himself, and the structure of his body should be studied not only by those who wish to become doctors, but by those who wish to attain to a more intimate knowledge of God. Just as close study of the niceties and shades of language in a great poem reveals to us more and more of the genius of its author. But when all is said, the knowledge of the soul plays a more important part in leading to the knowledge of God than the knowledge of our body and the functions. The body may be compared to a steed and the soul to its rider. The body was created for the soul for the body. If a man knows not his own soul, which is the nearest thing to him, what is the use of his claiming to know others? It is as if a beggar who has not the wherewithal for a meal should claim to be able to feed a town. In this chapter, we have attempted in some degree to expound the greatness of man's soul. He who neglects it and suffers its capacities to rust or to degenerate must necessarily be the loser in this world and the next. The true greatness of man lies in his capacity for eternal progress. Otherwise, in this temporal sphere he is the weakest of all things, being subject to hunger, thirst, heat, cold, and sorrow. Those things he takes most delight in are often the most injurious to him, and those things which benefit him are not to be obtained without toil and trouble. As to his intellect, a slight disarrangement of matter in his brain is sufficient to destroy or madden him. As to his power, the sting of a wasp is sufficient to rob him of ease and sleep. As to his temper, he is upset by the loss of a sixpence. As to his beauty, he is little more than nauseous matter covered with a fair skin. Without frequent washing, he becomes utterly repulsive and disgraceful. In truth, man in this world is extremely weak and contemptible. It is only in the next that he will be of value, if by means of the alchemy of happiness he rises from the rank of beasts to that of angels. Otherwise his condition will be worse than the brutes, which perish and turn to dust. It is necessary for him, at the same time that he is conscious of his superiority as the climax of created things, to learn to know also his helplessness, as that too is one of the keys to the knowledge of God. The knowledge of God. It is a well-known saying of the prophet that he who knows himself knows God. That is, by contemplation of his own being and attributes, man arrives at some knowledge of God. But since many who contemplate themselves do not find God, it follows that there must be some special way of doing so. As a matter of fact, there are two methods of arriving at this knowledge, but one is so abstruse that it is not adapted to ordinary intelligences, and therefore is better left unexplained. The other method is as follows. When a man considers himself, he knows that there was a time when he was non-existent, as it is written in the Quran. Does it not occur to man that there was a time when he was nothing? Further, he knows that he was made out of a drop of water in which there was neither intellect nor hearing, sight, head, hands, feet, etc. From this it is obvious that, whatever degree of perfection he may have arrived at, he did not make himself, nor can he now make a single hair. How much more helpless, then, was his condition when he was a mere drop of water? Thus, as we have seen in the first chapter, he finds in his own being reflected in miniature, so to speak, the power, wisdom, and love of the Creator. If all the sages of the world were assembled, and their lives prolonged for an indefinite time, they could not effect any improvement in the construction of a single part of the body. For instance, in the adaptation of the front and side teeth to the mastication of food, and in the construction of the tongue, salivating glands, and throat for its deglutition, we find a contrivance which cannot be improved upon. Similarly, whoever considers his hand, with its 5 fingers of unequal lengths, 4 of them with 3 joints, and the thumb with only 2, and the way in which it can be used for grasping or for carrying or for smiting, will frankly acknowledge that no amount of human wisdom could better it by altering the number and arrangement of the fingers or in any other way. When a man further considers how his various wants of food, lodging, etc. are amply supplied from the storehouse of creation, he becomes aware that God's mercy is as great as his power and wisdom, as he has himself said, "My mercy is greater than my wrath," and according to the prophet saying, "God is more tender to his servants than a mother to her suckling child." Thus, from his own creation man comes to know God's existence, from the wonders of his bodily frame God's power and wisdom, and from the ample provision made for his various needs God's love. In this way, the knowledge of oneself becomes a key to the knowledge of God. Not only are man's attributes a reflection of God's attributes, but the mode of existence of man's soul, or spirit, affords some insight into God's mode of existence. That is to say, both God and the soul are invisible, indivisible, unconfined by space and time, and outside the categories of quantity and quality. Nor can the ideas of shape, color, or size attach to them. People find it hard to form a conception of such realities as are devoid of quality and quantity. But a similar difficulty attaches to the conception of our everyday feelings, such as anger, pain, pleasure, or love. They are thought concepts and cannot be recognized by the senses, whereas quality, quantity, and so on are sense concepts. Just as the ear cannot take cognizance of color, nor the eye of sound, so in conceiving of the ultimate realities, God and the soul, we find ourselves in a region in which sense concepts can bear no part. So much, however, we can see that as God is ruler of the universe, and being himself beyond space and time, quantity and quality, governs things that are so conditioned, so the soul rules the body and its members, being itself invisible, indivisible, and not located in any special part. For how can the indivisible be located in that which is divisible? From all this we see how true is the saying of the prophet, God created man in his own likeness. And, as we arrive at some knowledge of God's essence and attributes from the contemplation of the soul's essence and attributes, so we come to understand God's method of working and government and delegation of power to angelic forces, by observing how each of us governs his own little kingdom. To take a simple instance, suppose a man wishes to write the name of God. First of all, the wish is conceived in his heart. It is then conveyed to the brain by the vital spirits. The form of the word God takes shape in the thought chambers of the brain, thence it travels by the nerve channels, and sets in motion the fingers, which in their turn set in motion the pen, and thus the name God is traced on paper exactly as it had been conceived in the writer's brain. Similarly, when God wills a thing, it appears in the spiritual plane, which in the Quran is called the throne. From the throne it passes by a spiritual current to a lower plane called the chair. Then the shape of it appears on the tablet of destiny, whence by the mediation of the forces called angels, it assumes actuality, and appears in the earth in the form of plants, trees, and animals representing the will and thought of God, as the written letters represent the wish conceived in the heart and the shape present in the brain of the writer. No one can understand a king but a king. Therefore God has made each of us a king in miniature, so to speak, over a kingdom which is an infinitely reduced copy of his own. In the kingdom of man, God's throne is represented by the soul, the archangel by the heart, the chair by the brain, the tablet by the treasure chamber of thought. The soul, itself unlocated and indivisible, governs the body as God governs the universe. In short, each of us is entrusted with a little kingdom and charged not to be careless in the administration of it. As regards the recognition of God's providence, there are many degrees of knowledge. The mere physicist is like an ant who, crawling on a sheet of paper and observing black letters spreading over it, should refer the cause to the pen alone. The astronomer is like an ant of somewhat wider vision who should catch sight of the fingers moving the pen. That is, he knows that the elements are under the power of the stars, but he does not know that the stars are under the power of the angels. Thus, owing to the different degrees of perception in people, disputes must arise in tracing effects to causes. Those whose eyes never see beyond the world of phenomena are like those who mistake servants of the lowest rank for the king. The laws of phenomena must be constant or there could be no such thing as science, but it is a great error to mistake the slaves for the master. As long as this difference in the perceptive faculty of observers exists, disputes must necessarily go on. It is as if some blind men, hearing that an elephant had come to their town, should go and examine it. The only knowledge of it which they can obtain comes through the sense of touch, so one handles the animal's leg, another his tusk, another his ear, and, according to their several perceptions, pronounce it to be a column, a thick pole, or a quilt, each taking a part for the whole. So the physicist and astronomer confound the laws they perceive with the lawgiver. A similar mistake is attributed to Abraham in the Quran, where it is related that he turned successively to stars, moon, and sun as the objects of his worship, till grown aware of him who made all these, he exclaimed, "I love not them that set." We have a common instance of this referring to second causes what ought to be referred to the first cause in the case of so-called illness. For instance, if a man ceases to take any interest in worldly matters, conceives a distaste for common pleasures, and appears sunk in depression, the doctor will say, "This is a case of melancholy, and requires such and such a prescription." The physicist will say, "This is a dryness of the brain caused by hot weather, and cannot be relieved till the air becomes moist." The astrologer will attribute it to some particular conjunction or opposition of planets. Thus far, their wisdom reaches, says the Quran. It does not occur to them that what has really happened is this, that the Almighty has a concern for the welfare of that man, and has therefore commanded his servants, the planets or the elements, to produce such a condition in him that he may turn away from the world to his Maker. The knowledge of this fact is a lustrous pearl from the ocean of inspirational knowledge, to which all other forms of knowledge are as islands in the sea. The doctor, physicist, and astrologer are doubtless right each in his particular branch of knowledge, but they do not see that illness is, so to speak, a cord of love by which God draws to himself the saints, concerning whom he has said, "I was sick, and ye visited me not." Illness itself is one of those forms of experience by which man arrives at the knowledge of God, as he says by the mouth of his prophet, "Sicknesses themselves are my servants and are attached to my chosen." The foregoing remarks may enable us to enter a little more fully into the meaning of those exclamations so often on the lips of the faithful. God is holy, praise be to God, there is no God but God. God is great. Concerning the last, we may say that it does not mean that God is greater than creation, for creation is his manifestation as light manifests the sun, and it would not be correct to say that the sun is greater than its own light. It rather means that God's greatness immeasurably transcends our cognitive faculties, and that we can only form a very dim and imperfect idea of it. If a child asks us to explain to him the pleasure which exists in wielding sovereignty, we may say it is like the pleasure he feels in playing bat and ball, though in reality the two have nothing in common except that they both come under the category of pleasure. Thus, the exclamation "God is great" means that his greatness far exceeds all our powers of comprehension. Moreover, such imperfect knowledge of God as we can attain to is not a mere speculative knowledge, but must be accompanied by devotion and worship. When a man dies, he has to do with God alone, and if we have to live with a person, our happiness entirely depends on the degree of affection we feel towards him. Love is the seed of happiness, and love to God is fostered and developed by worship. Such worship and constant remembrance of God implies a certain degree of austerity and curbing of bodily appetites. Not that a man is intended altogether to abolish these, for then the human race would perish, but strict limits must be set to their indulgence, and as a man is not the best judge in his own case as to what these limits should be, he had better consult some spiritual guide on the subject. Such spiritual guides are the prophets, and the laws which they have laid down under divine inspiration prescribe the limits which must be observed in these matters. He who transgresses these limits wrongs his own soul, as it is written in the Quran. Notwithstanding this clear pronouncement of the Quran, there are those who, through their ignorance of God, do transgress these limits, and this ignorance may be due to several different causes. Firstly, there are some who, failing to find God by observation, conclude that there is no God, and that this world of wonders made itself, or existed from everlasting. They are like a man who, seeing a beautifully written letter, should suppose that it had written itself without a writer, or had always existed. People in this state of mind are so far gone in error that it is of little use to argue with them. Such are some of the physicists and astronomers to whom we referred above. Some, through ignorance of the real nature of the soul, repudiate the doctrine of a future life, in which man will be called to account and be rewarded or punished. They regard themselves as no better than animals or vegetables, and equally perishable. Some, on the other hand, believe in God and a future life, but with a weak belief. They say to themselves, God is great and independent of us. Our worship or abstinence from worship is a matter of entire indifference to him. Their state of mind is like that of a sick man who, when prescribed a certain regime by his doctor, should say, "Well, if I follow it or don't follow it, what does it matter to the doctor?" It certainly does not matter to the doctor, but the patient may destroy himself by his disobedience. Just as surely as unchecked sickness of body ends in bodily death, so does uncured disease of the soul end in future misery. According to the saying of the Quran, only those shall be saved who come to God with a sound heart.